We're live from New Delhi. You're watching DD India News, India's Voice to the World. I'm Lipakshi Khurana, coming up in the next hour. Union Minister Kirtiwardhan Singh puts emphasis on dialogue and diplomacy while advancing initiatives such as the India-Middle East European Economic Corridor to promote connectivity and stability. Prime Minister Narendra Modi to address the post-budget webinar on the theme Agriculture and Rural Transformation via video conferencing. US-Israeli strikes on Iran continue on the 7th day, while President Trump says Iran calling US about a deal. Counting underway after Nepal concluded voting in its first major election with preliminary turnout around 60%. India secured a spot in T20 World Cup final after a thrilling 7-run victory over England at Mumbai's Wankhede Stadium. And on to the details now. The ongoing Raisina Dialogue, bringing together global leaders, policymakers and technology experts to deliberate on key geopolitical and economic challenges. Well, on day 2 of Raisina Dialogue, leaders from across the globe are attending the conference. Throughout the day, the dialogue will focus on how technological disruptions, strategic competition and economic security are reshaping global politics. This year's Raisina Dialogue returns with a theme that captures the moment we find ourselves in. Samskara, assertion, accommodation, advancement. Samskara is the inheritance of identity that enables civilization to assert who they are, accommodate the difference and advance through refinement. Well, in his remarks this morning, Minister of State for External Affairs of India, Kirtiwardhan Singh, said India's decisions are guided by national interest and not by aligning with any single bloc.
India's decisions are guided by our national interests, not by aligning with any single bloc. This conviction is tested daily, from energy security to distant conflicts, where India consistently upholds autonomy while deepening partnerships. Assertion begins with sovereignty. Along our borders, we have made it clear that peace and tranquility are indispensable for normalcy in relations. The dignity of our citizens and the status of our frontiers are not variables to be traded.
Well, on Thursday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated the Raisina Dialogue along with the President of Finland. Global leaders, policymakers and strategic experts from across the world are taking part in discussions on pressing global challenges.
The Raisina Dialogue, India's premier forum on geopolitics and global strategy, began in New Delhi with leaders and experts from across the world gathering to discuss the evolving global order. The conference, hosted by the Ministry of External Affairs and the Observer Research Foundation, has over the years emerged as one of the most influential platforms for dialogue on global security, economy and diplomacy. Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated the event along with the President of Finland, Alexander Stubb. In his inaugural address, the President of Finland spoke about global cooperation and the need for nations to work together in an increasingly complex geopolitical environment and extended support for India's UNSC membership.
The voices of the global south must be heard much louder than today. The obvious place to start is the UN Security Council. I have proposed 2 permanent seats for Asia, 2 for Africa and 1 for Latin America. And let me be clear, India should have a permanent seat in the UN Security Council.
The Raisina Dialogue has steadily grown into a major global platform, often compared with forums like the Munich Security Conference, reflecting India's rising voice in global geopolitics. As the world navigates conflicts, technological disruptions, and economic uncertainty, India is positioning itself as a key voice, shaping conversations on global governance and strategic cooperation. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar highlighted India's expanding diplomatic engagement and its role in shaping a more balanced and inclusive global order.
Our discussions over the next few days will be about new capabilities, military, economic, energy, human resources, and above all, technology. AI particularly awaits us.
For India, the conference also reflects the country's growing role as a global power, shaping conversations and building partnerships in an increasingly multipolar world. With leaders from dozens of countries participating, the dialogue is expected to host a wide range of discussions over the coming days on the future of global governance and strategic stability. Bureau Report, DD India.
And for more on this, we have Akshay Dongre joining us. Well, Akshay, on day 2 of the Raisina Dialogue, which specific geopolitical or economic challenges are expected to dominate the discussions, and what new insights or policy directions might emerge from today's panels? Akshay, with day 2 today of Raisina Dialogue, what can we expect today from the discussions?
Well, it's going to be quite an important day as far as the sessions are concerned, which are in large numbers. Sessions on technology, on food security, on the conflict that is taking place right now. As we are speaking to our viewers, the Deputy Foreign Minister of Iran is also speaking on the conflict that is brewing in West Asia. You have, both sides of the conflict speaking here at the Raisina Dialogue. Yesterday, Israeli officials were telling their side of the story as far as this conflict is concerned. So, indeed, Raisina Dialogue has become a place where, there is a convergence of policymakers, ministers, bureaucrats from around the world. You have officials from around the world coming in to one place to discuss and deliberate the problems that we are facing right now in relation to the brewing conflicts, in relation to the food security issues that the global south is facing, in relation to energy security, advancing technologies, etc. So all of these areas that impact so much of our everyday life, day-to-day life, so much of our geopolitics, including semiconductors, advanced manufacturing, quantum computing, all of these are not just independent entities anymore. They are deeply embedded with the way we live today, the way countries work, the way their militaries work. So all of this is discussed and deliberated upon at the Raisina Dialogue. And on day 2, there are several such sessions that are taking place. In fact, the External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, is also at the Taj Palace Hotel on the day 2. Just a few minutes back, Kirti Vardhan Singh, the Minister of State for External Affairs, made a statement talking about cooperation, talking about countries coming together to work together. So it's a jam-packed day as well as far as the schedules are concerned. Several high-level agendas are being discussed in the meetings that are taking place. Simultaneously, many meetings are taking place and many panel discussions, conversations are taking place here at Raisina Dialogue. And in the 3-day event, today's day is also going to be quite an interesting one, because now we have all of the inauguration done, and now it's back to the business as far as discussing diplomacy and discussing the conflict, discussing the problems, and coming up with solutions to these problems in the presence of the global leadership that has emerged in New Delhi.
All right, so a packed day today. Also, Akshay, what are the expected outcomes from this year's Raisina Dialogue, if we talk about the overall, that could shape India's role in global governance and international diplomacy, especially given the increasingly multipolar world and rising strategic competition?
Well, because this is not an international organization as such, it cannot have a resolution that is binding for anybody. So, if we speak about concrete results in terms of the outcomes of the meetings, there are hardly any. But when you talk about the symbolic, symbolic results that are going to come out, they are immense. In fact, Raisina Dialogue year-on-year places India more firmly on the geopolitical map of the world. It places New Delhi as a place where the leadership from around the world, even in these very difficult circumstances, have managed to gather, managed to discuss and deliberate on all of the problems that the
Right.
world faces right now, from a conflict in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, to the conflicts that are taking place in the African continent, the issues with food security resulting out of these conflicts, to the latest conflict in the Middle East. All of these issues are being deliberated, being discussed, and in terms of India being the place that is hosting these discussions, it makes the voice of India, makes the voice of Global South even more important, especially as a say in these conflicts to the rest of the world.
All right, Akshay, thank you so much for all those details. Unfinished President Alexander Stubb's state visit to India highlights the deepening strategic partnership between the two nations. The leader will be visiting Mumbai, where he will interact with Indian business leaders and attend an India-Finland business event. Our next report has more details.
Finnish President Alexander Stubb is on a state visit to India. This marks his first trip to the country as president. He is accompanied by a high-level delegation of ministers, officials and business leaders. President Stubb held bilateral talks with PM Modi at Hyderabad House in New Delhi, focusing on expanding cooperation in digitalization, sustainability, clean energy, quantum computing, semiconductors, defense and space. India and Finland signed 3 key MOUs during the visit to enhance bilateral cooperation, covering environmental cooperation, migration and mobility partnership, and statistics cooperation. These agreements pave the way for collaboration in areas like AI, 6G, and critical minerals.
ये पार्टनरशिप AI से लेकर 6G टेलीकॉम तक, क्लीन एनर्जी से लेकर क्वांटम कंप्यूटिंग तक, कई हाईटेक क्षेत्रों में हमारे सहयोग को गति और ऊर्जा देगा। साथ ही डिफेंस, स्पेस, सेमीकंडक्टर और क्रिटिकल मिनरल जैसे की सेक्टर्स में भी साझेदारी और गहरी बढ़ेगी।
PM Modi emphasized India's commitment to peaceful resolutions amid global tensions. He highlighted shared democratic values driving the new strategic partnership between India and Europe.
आज विश्व एक अस्थिरता और अनिश्चितता के दौर से गुजर रहा है। यूक्रेन से लेकर वेस्ट एशिया तक दुनिया के कई हिस्से उसमें संघर्ष की स्थिति बनी हुई है। ऐसे ग्लोबल एनवायरनमेंट में भारत और यूरोप दुनिया की 2 बड़ी डिप्लोमेटिक पावर्स अपने संबंधों के सुनहरे दौर में प्रवेश कर रहे हैं।
PM Modi said the upcoming India-EU free trade agreement would enhance trade and technology ties and called for deeper Arctic research collaboration. President Stubb recounted his last visit to India and hailed the partnership as important given the current geoeconomics and India's economic heft.
Salute your diplomatic skills when you say that we stand here as 2 big democracies. There is one big and one slightly smaller, but I think the key message is that we share values. I would also like to congratulate you for your leadership. My last visit to India was actually in 2013 in my capacity as Minister of Trade. And the change that I just see on the streets of New Delhi and that I will most probably see in Mumbai in a couple of days is palpable. This is an economic miracle that we're witnessing, and I wish you all the best.
President Stubb's visit signals a maturing India-Finland partnership, transforming long-standing goodwill into a strategic alliance amid shifting geopolitics. Bureau Report, DD India.
Well, India and Finland have reaffirmed their commitment to strengthening bilateral relations, with both sides agreeing to double bilateral trade by the year 2030. Speaking at a press briefing following the recent visit of the Finnish President, Secretary West in the Ministry of External Affairs, C.B. George, said the relationship between the two countries has grown steadily over the decades. He noted that the partnership has evolved into one driven by innovation and technology, reflecting shared priorities in emerging sectors and economic cooperation.
India and Finland enjoy warm and friendly relationship. Over the decades, our relationship has evolved into a forward-looking, innovation and technology-driven partnership. Finnish companies have strong presence in India in areas such as telecommunications, digital solutions, clean energy and smart manufacturing. Bilateral trade in goods and services is close to $3 billion. Trade and investment are expected to expand further with the coming in force of the India-EU Free Trade Agreement. In this respect, we have also agreed to double the trade by 2030.
Meanwhile, Secretary George also announced that India and Finland will co-host the World Circular Economy Forum, highlighting the growing collaboration between the two nations in sustainability initiatives.
Finland's globally recognized expertise in clean technologies, renewable energy, and sustainable urban solutions makes it a natural partner for India. India and Finland will also be co-hosting the World Circular Economy Forum in India later this year. During the visit, both sides have reviewed and renewed the MOU on environmental cooperation to further the collaboration on sustainability and circular economy, including bioenergy and waste-to-energy solutions, power storage, green hydrogen, as well as wind, solar, and small hydropower.
Well, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will address the post-budget webinar on the theme Agriculture and Rural Transformation at 11:15 AM IST via video conferencing. Under this theme, 8 different webinar sessions are being held covering 4 major sectors. Those are agriculture, animal husbandry and dairying, fisheries, and rural livelihoods. Well, the post-budget webinar will focus on promoting high-value agriculture by unlocking the potential of crops. It will also deliberate on the opportunities offered by Bharat Vistar, the AI-powered digital public infrastructure for agriculture. The sessions will also deliberate upon private sector investment and entrepreneurship in the animal husbandry value chain, integrated development of reservoirs and Amrit Sarovars for fisheries, strengthening coastal fisheries value chains, and expanding market access for products made by rural women entrepreneurs through self-help entrepreneurs, marketing avenues for rural transformation. And Indian Air Force has acknowledged the loss of squadron leader Anuj and Lieutenant Purvesh Durgakar, who sustained fatal injuries in the Sukhoi 30 crash. Indian Air Force personnel expressed condolences and stand firmly with the bereaved family in this time of grief. Early on Thursday, a Sukhoi 30 MKI fighter jet of the Indian Air Force was reported missing from radar contact after taking off from eastern Assam's Jorhat. Defence Minister Rajnath Singh also expressed his condolences to the bereaved families. He said their courage and service to the nation will always be remembered with pride and gratitude. And still to come on DD India NewsHour. Trump says US could turn focus to Cuba after Iran war ends. Trump fires Homeland Security Secretary Christine Noem amid controversy, taps Markwayne Mullin as replacement. And Kosovo faces third election in just over a year as Parliament fails to elect president.
Can the US launch a bombing campaign against Iran. The Philippines vessel suffered structural damage. The saga of child sexual abuse is the United States China's debt trap strategy. Truth is stranger than fiction. But sometimes hard to uncover. Trust us to tell the truth, unadulterated and pure, of every story that matters to you. You read between the lines, cut the clutter, and connect the dots to get you the full picture. Watch Connecting the Dots at these times with me, only on DD India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India News. I'm Lipakshi Khurana, and on to some Nepal update now. As the voting concluded peacefully in Nepal, according to the latest updates made available by the District Election Commission in Kathmandu, Rabi Lami Chatani's RSP party candidates are leading in different constituencies of Kathmandu. As the day rises, counting may conclude and results will be updated from various districts. And for more on this, we have joined by Siddharth Bharadwaj from Kathmandu, Nepal. Well, Siddharth, it appears that young voters had a major impact in the voting in the elections, hoping for a substantial change in the voting yesterday. With counting now underway, when can we expect the results to be announced?
Well, Lipakshi, results can be announced by 5 p.m., by the evening. But then the latest news that we are picking up here is that RSP, which is Rashtriya Swatantra Party, is leading in all 10 constituencies in Kathmandu. And this goes on to show that how the Gen Z protest, which happened in the September last year, wherein the Gen Zs got united for a cause, is actually, we are seeing the results of that. And since RSP is leading in all 10 constituencies in Nepal, in Kathmandu, goes on to show that it is showing effect. What Gen Z's demands, we all know. Gen Z's demand, they demand a good governance. They demand the next government should focus on the Gen Z's and their issues, which is migration is one of the issues, and of course new opportunities for Gen Z's. They say that the next government should provide more and more opportunities to Gen Z so that they don't have to work outside, they don't have to work in foreign countries. If we get more opportunities here in our own country, then we'll work here, we'll grow, and we can take care of our families. Lipakshi, the elections, the historic ones, we can say, which took place last year, yesterday on March 5th, the voter turnout was 60%, and when we compare that to last year, the voter turnout was somewhere around, last time in 2022, it was somewhere around 61%. So yeah, when you compare the voter turnout, it's not much difference, but then what stood out in these elections is the huge participation from the youth and especially from the Gen Zs. So the results of the 165 seats of the parliament, which comprise of 275 seats, is expected to be out today by 5 p.m. Or perhaps early. That we have to wait and see. But the thing is that the results for 165 seats, which comes under the first past the post, which is also known as the direct voting, will be out today, and we'll get to know which is leading in these elections, which party is leading, which political candidate is leading. But then in these elections, the battle is between the traditional political parties and the new leaders. When you talk about one of the oldest parties, Nepali Congress, Gagan Thapa is there. He is standing, as a person who's favorites to youth from the Nepali Congress, and Balendra Shah, as we all know, he's 35-year-old and is the most talked about leader when it comes to these elections.
Right.
The Gen Zs, the youth, they are in support of Balendra Shah, but then you can't say anything, and that is the reason these elections are very, very interesting, because you don't know what the result would be. However, the final result, it will take somewhere about 1 to 2 weeks to come out, because the proportional representation system is a complicated system. So the counting the ballots of proportional representation takes a little time. So that is the reason why the results will be out, within a week or two maybe.
All right.
But then as it comes to first past the post, the results are expected to be out today by 5 p.m. and we'll get to know which side the wind is blowing. Lipakshi.
All right. So as you said, the Gen Z, of course, has a major say in these elections. About 60% of voters participated in yesterday's election. How significant, Siddharth, is this turnout, if we talk about, particularly in the wake of the last year's youth-led protest?
Lipakshi, these are very, very significant elections. These are very, very important elections for Nepal. You know, when you talk about the Gen Z protest, which happened last year in the month of September, it actually shook the country, the entire country. It rocked the country and took a hit on country's economy and political stability as well. So from that perspective, these elections are very, very crucial. These elections are very, very important. Everyone, when we had a word with people who came to vote, we've been to somewhere about 9 to 10 polling stations, so maybe more. So people who were there, especially the young generations and Gen Z, they were saying that we are voting and we are voting for a change. We want to see change and we want the next government to eradicate the corruption from the country completely, because it is something that is having an effect on country's economy as well, and also further not letting the employment opportunities to get generated for the young people and for all the Gen Z. So they want the next government to specifically focus first on eradicating the corruption from the country, and number two, to generate more and more employment opportunities for the youth so that they can work here. And apart from that, migration is a big issue. Lipakshi, you can see people of Nepal, you've seen them working in some other countries as well. So they don't want that. They want to stay in their own country. They want to work here, and they want more and more opportunities there so that they can do they can take care of their families, and apart from that, they can do many other things. So from that perspective, these elections are very, very crucial. Now, when the next government will come, Lipakshi, when the final results will be out, single party majority is very unlikely. So it's very likely that a coalition government will be formed, again, that the results will decide. But if that happens, it will take further time. When the next government will be formed, the foreign policy of the government will also be formed, and it will decide a lot how the country's relation with the other countries are and will be. Especially when we talk about India and Nepal, both the countries share a very strong relationship.
Right.
Both the countries share cultural ties. Both the countries share people-to-people ties. So the relation between the two countries is very strong, and going further, it is expected to getting more and more stronger with the formation of the new government with these elections.
All right, so corruption, migration and employment, of course, are the major issues. And let's see where the results swing in next. Thank you so much for all those details. And moving on, US President Donald Trump suggested Washington could shift its focus to Cuba after the Iran conflict, saying it would be just a question of time once the ongoing war in the West Asia concludes. Well, he was speaking at an event with the Inter Miami soccer team at the White House. Trump also said the situation in Venezuela had been stabilized and praised acting President Delcy Rodriguez. He also said that the United States was imposing Venezuelan oil that was being refined in places such as Houston before revenue was returned to the country. Well, Washington has announced it will restore diplomatic ties with Caracas as Venezuela has promised safe conditions for foreign mining companies keen to invest in the country. It came after Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, signed oil deals with international major Shell. Rodriguez is hosting U.S. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum in the South American country. Burgum, who held talks with interim President Delcy Rodriguez during a two-day trip, said dozens of companies had expressed interest in investing in Venezuela. He hailed efforts by Rodriguez to open the South American country to foreign investment in oil and minerals, echoing praise by U.S. President Donald Trump. Also, U.S. President Donald Trump fired Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem on Thursday after months of controversy, including the fatal shootings of 2 U.S. citizens by federal officers in Minneapolis. On his Truth Social platform, Donald Trump said that he will tap Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin to replace her by the end of the month. The appointment would require U.S. Senate confirmation. Known for her aggressive rhetoric and controversial social media presence regarding immigration, her departure marks a potential turning point for the administration's most prominent policy area. Now, during congressional hearings this week, Democrats and some Republicans criticized Noem for her approach to immigration enforcement and management of her department. And speaking on the cartels in the region, White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller said that cartels operating in the Western Hemisphere can only be defeated with military power. Miller explicitly equated these cartels with global terror networks.
The cartels that operate in this hemisphere are the ISIS and the Al-Qaeda of the Western Hemisphere, and should be treated just as brutally and just as ruthlessly as we treat those organizations. What we have learned after decades of effort is that there is not a criminal justice solution to the cartel problem. There are elements of the problem that require a criminal justice solution, to be sure. But just as we fought Al-Qaeda and fought ISIS with the tip of a very lethal spear, the reason why this is a conference with military leadership and not a conference of lawyers is because these organizations can only be defeated with military power.
Well, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage launched his party's Senate election manifesto in Wales alongside Welsh Reform leader Dan Thomas on Thursday. Farage, a veteran Brexit campaigner, is on a mission to professionalise the party before the next national election due in 2029. Although Reform UK only holds 8 of the 650 seats in Britain's parliament, Farage's party has topped national opinion polls since early last year and hopes to triumph in another round of local elections in May. While Farage heavily criticised UK government's response to the war in Iran, labelling the nation humiliated by its inaction. And for the first time, third time in just over a year, Kosovo voters are expected to return to the polls to elect a government after deeply divided MPs failed to elect a president. Despite topping 2 general elections, Prime Minister Albin Kurti's party failed to secure support for its preferred presidential pick, falling at the latest hurdle in a crisis that had left the country without a functioning parliament for nearly a year. The Assembly session was adjourned shortly before midnight when the deadline to elect the new president expires. If the president is not elected, the incumbent has to dissolve the Assembly and call snap elections. The opposition boycotted the session and only MPs of the ruling Betty Vendotze party were present in the parliament. Well, a general election a year ago left Kurti without the majority needed to form a government, leading to months of parliamentary stasis. Polarized lawmakers eventually forced a December snap poll, which Kurti's party won with over 51% of the vote, securing 57 seats. Well, Ukrainian president said that he had discussed the conflict in the West Asia and relations with the EU with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. He also thanked Meloni for the support for Ukraine and Ukrainians during the discussions. And still to come in DD India NewsHour. United States House of Representatives reject a bid to halt Trump's Iran war as lawmakers back ongoing military campaign. Indira Gandhi International Airport issues advisory as West Asia tensions may delay westbound flights, urges passengers to contact their respective airlines before heading to the airport. And Anthony Albanese says Australian personnel were on US submarine during Iranian warship strike but took no part in the attack. Welcome back. You're watching TD India News. I'm Lipakshi Kuran, and moving on, the raging Iran war, which has spread across the West Asia and beyond, entered its 7th day on Friday after Israeli forces announced a next phase in the conflict and bombed Beirut's southern suburbs. Israel responded with airstrikes and sent ground troops into some Lebanese border villages, and it targeted Beirut's southern suburbs, saying it was striking Hezbollah infrastructure. The Israeli military had earlier issued an unprecedented evacuation warning for the entire area. Israeli army said that its military has destroyed more than 60% of Iranian ballistic missile launchers in the opening phase of its campaign in Tehran.
We have neutralized and destroyed more than 60% of ballistic missile launchers, a highly significant achievement that reduces harm to the home front and saves many lives. I am in continuous contact with American counterparts, including the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff of the United States, General Dan Kane, and the commander of CENTCOM, Admiral Brad Cooper. We are fighting based on shared interests and values. In this war, shoulder to shoulder, they are true friends.
While Iran's elite revolutionary guards announced a wave of missile launches on the Israeli commercial hub of Tel Aviv on Friday, the fresh attack comes after an earlier wave of explosions that caused a blaze at a residential building in the central Israeli city. And let's cut live again to Raisina Dialogue, where External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar.
It last 70 years is 1% of Indian history. Why would 1%
of Indian history bother you?
Last? No, it bothers me. But why would it last? Life moves on. So, somewhere I think this attachment to the past did not take into account the forces that were propelling the change. So, then we come to the present. The 2-3 points I really liked about the book. One, of course, the fact that it was a triangulation, because much of the debate today is global West, the fight within the West, to some extent a binary of West and East. So I really appreciate that you brought in the South, because conceptually the South matters more and more. Also, I think one important variable which often gets left out, which is demographics, that if there are going to be two big changes in this decade, one will be technology, but the other will be demography. And I think President has kind of brought that into the metrics. Regarding the future, it's again, a lot of the analysis is obviously centered around the changes in America. So is the book. So it's about G1, it's about G2, though that's not that strongly addressed by you. I understand why, I empathize fully with that. You've even in passing referred to a kind of G3. The 3 being Russia. My sense is you're going to have a future which will really be much more multipolar, because no country today has hegemony over so many domains that it is an overall hegemon. So it's not just a distribution of GDP and capabilities. I think in different domains, different parts of the world will be more contributive or will have more capability. So the power in its different dimensions has spread out much more. So to that extent, your point that, we can't really use completely the tools and experiences of the past to project ahead.
So, President, you have some feedback from 3 of them. I particularly like the idea that how does this arrangement play out in the peace and security domain that we are currently challenged by? Do young people and the demographic change that we are experiencing incorporated in this?
No, I mean, I think good constructive criticism. I see the whole conceptualization of the book as an iteration, and therefore, just like Vali said, kind of a beginning of a conversation. I personally then try nowadays as a policymaker to sort of push it a little bit forward. I did that in 2 of my UN speeches in September 24 and 25. I did it in a foreign affairs article, which I called The West's Last Chance. And I did it in my speech yesterday, where I tried to bring, I think, a practical element of a New Delhi moment. In other words, a getting together of world leaders to discuss what the next order looks like. So that's why this conversation is useful. First observation, I had not, Vali, thought about we having a new unipolar moment, but I think you're actually right. And I think, Dr. Jaishankar, you also referred to that there is this element that, yes, there is multipolarity, but the United States is obviously doing many of the things without consultation. I mean, unlike it did in Libya, unlike it did in Iraq or in Afghanistan, where there was an attempt at least to, get a UN Security Council.
Some countries.
Yes, some countries. And also, discuss in the UN. So then we come to what is the cost for peace and security. Well, we can see it right now. And this is what makes me so optimistic, that we're going to have this new multilateral moment. And so I try to see the silver lining and say, well, because we're seeing what's going on in the Middle East, we're seeing what's going on in Ukraine, we're seeing what's going on in Sudan, therefore we need to come together to some kind of a new covenant, because actually the cost of multipolarity is too high right now. And I fully understand, Samir. I am simplifying the fact and making multipolarity look a baddie, whereas in some minds actually multipolarity is getting agency from a multilateral world which didn't give them agency. But I do think this is a starting point, and I do try to put it in the context what happens. And this is kind of a double answer to Vali and Dr. Jaishankar. I mean, the reason I joked in the beginning that should I call this the rectangle of power instead. So now if I would frame it again, I would think hard again that, are we in one of those moments where there is a detachment of the United States from the global West? And I think the jury is still out, but there's an element of that. And interestingly enough, it's the global West that's really upset about it, that, ooh, what's going on? Whereas, countries in the Gulf region and elsewhere are kind of saying, listen, you're getting the medicine that we've been getting for the past 80 years, so get used to it. So then my argument would be, just based on the US national security strategy, where the #1 region is the Western Hemisphere. So then the US becomes the global West with its own line.
By the way, I asked the Deputy Secretary from the US yesterday, what does American Western Hemisphere foreign policy mean? And he brought it all the way to India. So Western Hemisphere is also growing.
Then it's quite big. But then, then I would use the global North as the new sort of ideological global West. But then that's a problem, because I come from the global North and it sounds a bit sort of, I don't know, too mirroring. Yeah. Then to Vinke, I fully agree. It's an issue of age, it's an issue of social media. I mean, people make the question, are we cyborgs? My question now is, what is the first thing you do in the morning when you wake up? You probably look at your phone, right? You check at all your basic metrics of how you slept and the media, etc.
The best way to reconcile that problem is by making the phone wake you up.
It's true. But the bottom line is that I do think that we're completely attached. And one of the things, the original version of the book was actually called Digital Democracy or Digital Dictatorship. But then I decided to convert it into more of a geopolitical book. But I do think that one of the most sort of underestimated elements of geopolitics is technology. There are many good books about it, right now. There's one by Eric Schmidt and Henry Kissinger, and there are many others as well that we should look into it. And I do agree that we might have a slightly old mindset about the way in which we try to use the new tools in the world. But that's, again, that's why I'm saying this is not 1945, this is 2026, and we need to have a revision of it. And then to Dr. Jaishankar, I mean, if I read you correctly, you're not a big fan of the way in which I treated the past, but you're okay with the way in which I look at the present, and you're fairly happy at how I look at the future, right? And so this is good news for me. It's good news for Finnish-India relations. No, but what I do in the book in the beginning, I sort of try to undress the pretext that this book is somehow a neutral assessment of the world. I tell about my own identity. I am born in Finland, I'm a Nordic, I'm a European, and I have gotten my grounding for academia and my intellectual path in the United States. So I'm by definition a child of the end of the Cold War. I belong to the end of history category of humans who look at the world from a very Western perspective. And I've gotten pushback on this from other friends as well, that why don't you deal with, say, colonialism, etc., etc. And I even get pushback from my team who said, we don't like your dates because they're too Western oriented. So I take that, but I wanted to put out there in the front that I am a prisoner of my own identity. And that's why you can see the sort of past thinking of that. 70 years is 1% of Indian history. But for me, I'm now a country that is 110 years old because we gained independence in 1917. So again, that's why my sort of thinking is a little bit limited, and to a certain extent, from an understandable perspective, historical. And it is by the West, for the West, and from the West. I like the way in which you framed it. Then on the present thing, I'm glad that you like the triangle of power and the fact that this is not a binary assessment of East versus West. That is, I think, the big idea of the book. And now I just hope that people who are more acquainted with things linked to the global South are able to develop the ideas that come out there. And I do think, in quite a good way, I push the demography argument and the tech argument there. Although the tech argument, I admit, is a little bit too Chinese in it. Whereas it should have been, I think, a little bit more Indian as well. On the future, I really don't know. I think that's where we are. I mean, I come back to my speech yesterday. We over-rationalize the past, we over-dramatize the present, and we underestimate the future. And I think this is what the book sort of just throws some ideas out there that I hope that people grab onto.
Dr. Jaishankar, I could see you wanting to
No, I just had one brief comment, which is to pick up, Samir, on your point. Multipolarity is here to stay. Okay. What we will have, which we are already seeing, is to some extent, some of the bigger countries will make temporary compacts on limited issues. I'm not saying they are insincere about it, maybe they are, but structurally there's not going to be some big deal between powers and the rest of the world has to put up with it. That era is over. So the one thought I would suggest is, if multipolarity is there to stay, the issue is not that it's against multilateralism. You can have multipolarity with multilateralism and multipolarity without multilateralism, or how much multilateralism. So the success of multilateralism should not depend on the weakening of multipolarity, because the weakening of multipolarity is not going to happen. So I would sort of just urge you to reflect on that.
Quick response, President?
Yeah, quick response. I agree, and that's why I think in chapter 3, where I talk about the evolution of international organizations and institutions, I raise modern forms of multipolarity, and I call them either holy or unholy alliances, like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is not necessarily values-based, but it is interest-based. And I'm super happy a country like India is in there, from my perspective. I mentioned the BRICS as an example of multipolarity. Then on the more holy alliances, AUKUS is an example there of...
how is AUKUS holy and BRICS unholy? I didn't get that.
It's a little bit values and interest-based. I think BRICS is...
Interest-based. I think it's interest-based. There's no values there.
In AUKUS?
Or in BRICS. I'm saying
no, not in BRICS.
Interest-based, both of them.
But don't you think AUKUS is a little bit...
well, what is the value here? It's white people ganging up and getting nuclear devices exchanged with each other. What's the value here? I mean, look, listen, I'm just being a little provocative.
I'll take it back. I mean, the Quad is more values and interest-based. Okay. No, but I mean, no, I agree, but it is countries that have similar values that get together on the basis of interests, whereas in BRICS, it's not countries that have similar values. They get together on the basis of interest. And these are not, Samir, these are not value judgments. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but they're forms of multipolarity. So that's my first point. My second point is, the reason in yesterday's speech I wanted to bring another element into it, and it was a thesis that I thought about long and hard in the book, but didn't make clearly enough. I think that regional integration, call it regional multilateralism, is actually the best breeding ground for global multilateralism. So if I had a choice, I'd start, instead of these slightly haphazard multipolar arrangements, I'd go for the regional thing and then bring it up. Yeah, bottoms up. But it's complicated as well.
So I have one question before I go to our young fellows. It's a tradition here. We go to our young fellows and take questions from them. So before I go to them, I have one question for all of you. Since we have a fairly graphic estimation of the global West that you describe. I'm not sure we fully understand global South in the same frame. So in some sense, could I ask each of you what global South really means for you? And Vipke, I have one additional question for you. In your Instagram world, how many folks are interested in this conversation that we are having? In your Instagram world, how many of your followers are interested in this kind of a conversation? Just think about it, okay? So is this going to be trending on your timeline? That's my question for you. Wally, can I start with you? Global South, and what does it really mean for you and for those who you work with?
I mean, in a way, it's a residual concept. In other words, it's what the West is not, and often even the terminology, the way we think about it, often comes from the West. But although, just to Dr. Jaishankar's point, it does have a history. I mean, it goes back to the 1950s and era of decolonization, and the way in which these former colonies basically said we're neither the East nor the West, and we don't want to be limited to that struggle. Its self-conception has changed over time. But I think we still are dealing with some of that in a sense, that there's a vast region of the world that wants to be recognized, if you would, as equal partners in shaping the global order. It doesn't, where it's lacking, I think, is a clear sense of values because it's such a disparate region of the world. So yes, it has a common history or a common historical experience of colonization, imperialism, and not being taken seriously. But beyond that, I think it lacks a positive sense of what set of values does it want to bring to the table. So in a way, it's still captive to the set of values that international law that came out of World War II is still trying to establish.
Fair enough. Vipke?
So first of all, I'm not from the Global South. I need to stress that in the first point. I do understand why Alex made the point of putting three things there, global West, global East, and global South. But at the same time, at least in my perception from the global West, I feel like the global South is much more diverse, and that it is probably also a little bit acquainted as a term, because I think that you can't really put several countries who are considered sometimes global South into the same pot. For example, I'd love India to play a much bigger role also in G7, for example. I think that it would be really important to have such a big democracy in these global superpower rounds. I think this would be really helpful. So I think, I'm also here to listen and to learn. This is why I came to India, because I think this is such a fascinating country with such a bright future. And I think that the relations between Europe and India should be strengthened. That's also why I'm here, to listen and to learn. But this is my perception as of now. Please come to me and tell me what I got wrong. And for your second question, I'm sure that this discussion will be turned into great reels so that they are a little bit shorter for everyone to watch on the internet. But at the same time, I feel that the younger generation is really interested in politics.
It is.
Because for us, our future isn't certain anymore. We don't have the promise anymore that we might live a better life than our parents, at least not in Europe or in Germany. There are great questions to be asked from the youth. So they are really interested in what's going on in the world. And so I think this is a topic that we need to address more. But thank you very much also for getting me on this panel, because I always feel like the younger voice is often lacking in these conversations.
Okay. I can now turn to Dr. Jaishankar for his, probably the foreign minister from the Global South, to respond to what the Global South really means.
You know, look, I think the definition of Global South would be a solid, countries who had been colonized. But it's not so much a definition. I mean, in here, if you are from the Global South, it's a emotion. It's a sense of solidarity. And don't take it as sloganeering or, some kind of diplomatic clever term. Look, when COVID happened, the fact that a country like India, which was still undergoing its vaccination, was willing to send out vaccines to countries of the Global South means Global South is for real. Because it meant something for us. So there is a emotion and I would argue to some degree a culture where Global West is concerned. So Global South emanates from shared historical experiences. You could argue we are the victims in a sense of history, recent history, who have combined together. I think Global West was probably a more unified term, very cultural, very political, very strategic, till recently. Now there is a differentiation in the Global West, which is why he wants to make it a rectangle. So the fact that it's still there, I would argue, but less cohesive, less tight than before. I have actually a question on the Global East, because I don't think that kind of solidarity or that kind of cohesion really exists where Eastern
Hemisphere.
So, yeah. Well, there's no Eastern Hemisphere in, this is meant...
Unless you read Kishore's book.
But I would argue that, many of the countries which are envisaged as Global East really think of themselves much more as strong national players and much less collectively as an East. So I think it's less cohesive. West is more differentiated. I think South is very...
South is a vibe. You said South is a vibe. Right. South is a vibe, West is differentiated, East is probably the weakest.
Invented.
Is invented.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't go that far. But first of all, I'm not going to, give advice sitting next to Dr. Jaishankar about what the Global South is, but I really liked your definition that you feel it, you sense it, it's in your heart, it's about culture, it's about identity. I mean, it's obviously broader and different than a national identity, but there's a feeling and a sense, and some of it is definitely historical. And then the diversity within the Global South, whether it's geography or politics or demography or economics, is huge, but that's why we are different. And here's where I want to come to, again, the iteration point on the book. Yesterday, my second point out of the three proposals was that respect diversity globally, and that needs to be seen in the institutions as well. I should tell you one interesting thing. I mean, I remember sending a message to a friend of mine, and I said that foreign policy should never be driven by the past, because then we victimize ourselves. And I was thinking about Russia, because Russia is super good at using the historical narrative. She came back to me and said, "How dare you say that? That means that you're erasing periods of colonial history and others." I said, Whoops, point well taken. You're absolutely right. That's why it's so difficult to, for a Westerner to write about it. My sort of final point is on the social media and Modi. I was super happy that we were able to do a joint posting on Instagram with Modi. We have 4 million views of it.
All right, you were watching live from day 2 of the Raisina Dialogue, Author's Corner, where External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar and Finnish President Alexander Stubb, among others, were giving their views at a panel discussion on Finnish President's new book, The Triangle of Power. They also spoke about how the changing global order looks like amid the geopolitical tensions. Dr. Jaishankar said that multipolarity is here to stay, and the leaders also discussed their views on the Global South. Dr. Jaishankar said the Global South was an emotion, sharing same historical experiences. All right, that's all for this edition of DD India News Hour, but let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. For those on the go, you can get all the latest news and updates from India and across the world on the DD India mobile app. The app is available on both Android and iOS platforms. Scan the QR code on the screen to download now. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Lipakshi Khurana from all of us here in Delhi. Thanks for watching DD India News Hour.